Right, councillors, we will resume our meeting, and first up we've got a resolution on the screen in the name of Councillor Barrett, and I'll invite you to speak to that. I will just say that if there are questions, we'll just direct those to the Chief Executive at the moment, and possibly the Acting Manager of Planning and Strategy will be in soon. But Councillor Barrett, you can speak to that in the meantime.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move a motion that the Council affirms our support for joint shareholding with Manawatu District Council in CEDA and directs our Chief Executive to commence a review of the current shareholding arrangements. The reason that I raise this in the context of Section 17A review is that I feel that there are some fundamental questions about how we go about regional economic development and the model that we use there that we haven't really given voice to, and this is an example of one of those questions. Before going further, I would state that I have a very strong support for a collaborative model with the district and see us having a high amount of interdependency, interconnectedness, and want to make sure that we maintain a strong collaborative footing. But the current shareholding arrangements, to me, they've just always seemed a bit odd in that they make us look like a pair of twins. But when we look at the city having a bigger population and a bigger and more diverse economy, to me the more natural sort of way of expressing it might be a bit more like a big sister, little sister relationship. So yes, very interconnected, but not twins. That's my personal view, and I would simply like, through this resolution, to understand what the potential risks might be and what the potential rewards might be around potential adjustments to the shareholding relationship to better reflect the proportionality that we actually see on the ground between our two communities. It is just my view at this stage, and it's one that I'm very open to taking advice on, and again, that is the point of this recommendation, is to get a review that would bring us back substantial advice around this. Now, I acknowledge that some around the table may actually hold a different view than my personal view and might be quite happy with the sort of 50-50 joint shareholding, but I encourage you, even if you're of that view, to still support this recommendation, because I do think it's incumbent on us as we actually go through this Section 17 review that we ensure that we ask all the relevant questions, even the ones that might be a little bit awkward to ask at times. So I'd ask you to support this recommendation so that we can get good advice back on what the risks, what the rewards might be around any change in shareholding arrangements, and be able to make an informed discussion and decision from there. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to try and keep this item as tidy as possible. So I'll ask if there are any questions to begin with. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question through you to the CE, please, about what does that mean to commence a review? Would that mean in terms of reference coming back, or how would you see that turning into action?
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. The way that I see this is that we would take away this recommendation, if it, this motion, if it passes. We would look at what maybe the others do if they're in this situation, other councils or council arrangements with these joint councils. We would have a discussion with MDC and get their views on the matter, and then come back with you with some options, and to Councillor Barrett's point, the consequences of what each of those may be. So you can make an informed decision.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you to the mover, what practical difference do you think it would make if the shareholding was called 20/80 or 75/25 in terms of what actually happens?
Through you, Madam Chair, actually that's one of the questions I think we need answered through this review process. My understanding is that there would be some differences around how board appointments might be made, but beyond that, I don't actually myself know what, in fact, our shareholding agreement is, how far it reaches into the activities of the governance and direction setting of CETA. And so I would be very much looking forward to getting that information back alongside so that, again, we would understand the scope of any potential change to those shareholding arrangements. So for me, the fundamental basis here is much more just around noting that there isn't a one-to-one proportionality between our two communities and asking if there's a more reasonable way to reflect the balance between our communities and the balance of shareholding.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I'm not really sure where this question actually lies, but say, for example, through the Joint Steering Planning Committee, if we retain a 50-50 voting share, I would really like some clarity in terms of how that can be expanded into some kind of sort of benefit for Palmerston North City Council versus Manawatu District Council. You know, when you're looking at sort of the investment / benefit that we might get from that. So I'm just, I guess, searching for some clarity on that. Thank you.
I'll put that to the mover in this first instance around the intent of the recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It does remind me to clarify a point which I neglected to in the initial comment. This recommendation is specifically about the shareholding arrangements. It is not about the Joint Strategic Committee. So the Joint Strategic Committee is a one-to-one balance, considers a number of things on behalf of the city and the district. Personal view is that one-to-one balance in a Joint Strategic Committee is actually quite appropriate and probably the best way to ensure that we're working in that context. So this is specifically about the shareholding arrangements in CETA and recognizing that, you know, we put in 3/4 of the funding, we have a larger and more diverse community and economy. How should we consider that in terms of how it might be reflected in the shareholding arrangements?
Councillor Beattie.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I may ask the CE if there is a cost and timing if this goes through?
I haven't had time to reflect on that yet. There may well be a cost involved in that, and I would consider that this work, certainly internally, we probably don't have the resources to do this, so it may well need to be put out. Just depends on how much work is involved in this, and I couldn't give you an indication of cost at this stage.
Right, so there's no further questions, so we will now move into comment. I'll just make a brief comment that I'm happy to support this. I guess my view on reading this recommendation and my rationale for supporting this is I actually think that this is much more of a conversational approach to this. This doesn't necessarily signal that anything may change at all, actually, but the reality is that this gives a clear direction that our council wants to have that conversation, and through doing that, through speaking with MDC and through looking at, as the Chief Executive said, what other joint shareholding arrangements there are around the country, I think we'll be able to get a steer and have some sort of comparison around how our current arrangements reflect what others are doing. And so this doesn't necessarily direct that there'll be a particular outcome, but I think that actually if we stop and have a conversation with our colleagues at MDC and also look at other options, then that's when we'll find out sort of where we sit at the moment. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is brought up, and again, it's one of those ones around starting a conversation, part of the Section 17A review around, is this the best mode and option available to us? And there was a lot of work done when we merged the two former organisations around tourism and economic 6 years ago. And I would just wonder whether or not maybe some of that work, rather than reinventing the review, actually just recirculate the rationale from the 50-50 if it should be still on hand, to circulate at least in the process in the meantime for members to just get a confidence around the benefit of the 50-50 as one action. I think that can be done in line with this. It may very well be that 50-50 is still the way forward, but without bringing these type of conversations up and giving some tension around the pros and cons and the ongoing success of our relationship together, I think this also is a healthy way of bringing the conversation as part of a process. So two things there. One is I know there's a lot of work done and around that 50-50, and I'll look to call for that to be circulated in the meantime. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett, would you like a right of reply? Okay, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 14 in favour and 1 against. Our next item is item 10, Capital New Growth Programs, request to bring forward funding on page 133, and Robert Van Bentum is speaking to this.
Thank you, Madam Chair, councillors. Look, really just suffice to say that the really request here around funding, additional funding for this year, is really the result of, I suppose, officers making a determination for the current annual plan around the level of expected capital investment as part of the deliberations on keeping the rates increase down. So we determined that a lot of the growth work that was occurring in some of our growth areas would take a little time to eventuate. As it's turned out, a number of these areas are moving a little more quickly, and it's important that we now undertake particularly the detailed design and in one case some installation of key infrastructure so that we can provide services, upgraded roading access, but also water and wastewater services and stormwater for those areas. So it is new money to this year, but in all cases it's really money that was pushed out until next or subsequent years. So in effect it's committed to in the long-term plan, but we're looking at timing. So really that's all I wish to say in terms of these specific requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. So just to clarify then, we, through our long-term plan budgeting that work we're doing at the moment with the draft, would we then expect to see, when we have our next workshop in the new year, we would then expect to see changes to subsequent years' programs, because even though this is new money for this year, you're saying it's actually being brought forward?
Yeah, and in fact, in the current 10-year plan, a lot of this growth infrastructure was actually, it's not even next year or the following, it's actually out a number of years. So the proposed LTP shows a lot of that growth money brought forward, and that's been certainly in the current profile that we brought to you. So I mean, these are relatively small amounts out of those. So 100,000 would shift here from those budget years in order to fund this. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Beattie.
You've probably answered my question, but just the way the recommendations are reading, it's increasing the budget. It doesn't say we're bringing budget forward.
Yeah, I discussed this with the Chief Financial Officer. I mean, in effect, because there is no budget in this financial year, we are approving additional budget, even though in reality, you're essentially, bringing it forward from another financial year. Because we're also going into a long-term plan, you're reconsidering the profile for the next 10 years as well. So, I mean, that's what I was recommended to do, yeah, so.
I suppose just for clarification, because if you approve additional funding of program 1005, you're saying that you're increasing that program by 100,000. So even if it's got 900,000 over 10 years, you're now saying that you want $1 million.
Yeah, well, the reality, these growth programs keep changing, you know, reasonably frequently. And what we have done is we've rescoped all of those as part of the new LTP. So you'll find that actually there's quite a lot more money in these programs anyway. So,
Okay, so
but I'm happy to, you know, if you want to change the wording.
For sake of, I think we can do it through the, yeah, fine. Thank you, you've answered.
Councillor Petrinas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 135, item 2.12, I read that KiwiRail have lodged their NOR. What's the current status of the Railway Road water bore?
We're progressing with the final contracts to install the pumping equipment and the treatment plant. So we've just let those contracts. They were dependent on getting DIA money, and so we've had a bit of a hold-up, a delay. We're aiming to have the bore commissioned and operating, you know, at the very end of the financial, if not just into the next financial year, so July, August of this.
So you can confirm that KiwiRail did not want that bore moved?
They do wish to take a portion of that footprint, which requires, we're in conversation with them about relocating some of the future infrastructure, particularly the buffer storage tank, which we had indicated we would build. So we're still negotiating with them around, some readjustment, but not what's been built. No, we are not moving that infrastructure, and that's not required.
So the second follow-up question was that from the Railway Road water bore, there was to be a new water main laid all the way through to Bunnythorpe. How's that progressing?
Well, that's in the long-term plan, but yeah, we're not actively designing and programming that at the moment because it's still some years out. So, and the alignment of that might well change now with obviously KiwiRail notice requirements. So we will need to relay a sewer between Bunnythorpe and the city as part of that KiwiRail development, and it may well be pertinent to look at water main along the same alignment. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor. Sorry, Councillor Naylor, if you could just pause for a moment. We just need to get you on the screen and make sure we can hear your question. Okay, Councillor Naylor, you can ask your question.
Thank you. I'm just looking at page 136 at bullet point 3.1 and see that 100% of the request for funding is funded from development contributions, but obviously later on it talks about that there's a lag with that. So I'm just wondering what the impact of us approving this will have on our year-end result for 2021 and perhaps, how that will be funded while, I'm assuming it's debt funded, is it?
It is, it's debt funded, yes.
And so do we have an understanding of what the impact may be on our year-end result at this point?
I can't comment in detail, but obviously we've had quite a lot of building consent work and development consent work, so that we have been collecting development contributions across the city for every lot. I think it's just over $8,000. But for the growth areas, at this stage we are forwarding, as it were. We are building the infrastructure, and then we'll need to recover that from the developers when they apply for subdivision or building consent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. There's no further questions. So we have got the recommendations on the screen. Moved by Councillor Beattie, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Johnson. Councillor Beattie, did you want to make a comment?
Just quickly, this is straightforward and it's for growth and we're getting the money out of development contributions, so that's all I need to say.
Great, there's no further comments, so I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 100%. Moving on to item 11, page 141, Capital New Development Contributions, Programs of Work 2020 to 21, request for additional funding. Welcome back, Robert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this request again for additional funding is really because of the problematic nature of matching up requests or requirements to fund or additional capacity through subdivision applications, and providing a provisional sum within the program, within the annual plan. So, as the report said, there are 4 provisional sum programs. Historically, we haven't had much call on that, as you've seen in the table. So there's often been a surplus. We've been fairly conservative about the provision we've made, and this year we've had a significant number of, requests or requirements for us to fund some, growth or contributions to additional infrastructure. So, yeah, hence we're coming to you for, particularly in the roading space here in stormwater, for additional funding. So, I think overall, over a number of years, these programs have balanced themselves out. So, and again, as I said before, we have a lot of subdivision and building consent activity within the city. These programs fund the sort of, particularly the infill work, so where there's no dedicated growth area or development contributions policy. This is citywide material. So really that's all I wish to say. Open to questions.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I hope I'm on the right item here. Look, I'm just on page 142 there. There's comment around the council requirement to purchase a lot in Atlantic Drive to facilitate a road or active transport. Can you just explain what that is?
Yeah, what that essentially, as part of ensuring that we have connectivity between various adjacent subdivision developments. So council, flags to the developer where we want to purchase a route through. So currently we need to pay the commercial price for that lot. So we acquire that lot and then it becomes either road reserve and allows us to facilitate connectivity to the neighbouring block of land for the next stage of development. So.
Yeah, sorry, but there was actually no information on that. Just actually provided with the with the report. So, connecting with which other subdivision or other block?
Well, it's a block of land that's not currently yet developed. So it's Pacific Drive. I mean, I haven't got the exact details, but it's part of our wider structure planning exercise that we would intend that was the next stage of subdivision development in that area. So, I mean, we have to move when we have the land available. So we have to secure it. Otherwise, we lose that connectivity option going forward. So, yeah.
So it's at this point it's notional rather than.
It's pretty firm that that land will be developed, and we will, when we get the subdivision application, we will require the developer to connect to this lot, so to provide connectivity. So it becomes a requirement under their subdivision.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Robert. There's no further questions. So we've got the resolutions on the screen, moved by Councillor Dennison, seconded by Councillor Barrett. Thank you. Councillor Dennison, did you wish to make a comment?
Again, it's very similar to the previous item around approving some works that's required. and just providing the financial sum to start it. Thank you.
Thank you. No further comment. I will invite you to vote. Great, that has carried 100%. Moving on to item 12, page 145, the Cuba Street redevelopment stage 2 endorsement of options. And Robert again, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This report really reports back on the work done on the next stage of the Cuba Street development. As councillors will be aware, they've endorsed a city centre framework which has as its objectives the activation of many of the inner city streets, refocus towards promoting pedestrian activity and active transport, and sort of slowing and better managing traffic movements. So the officers have engaged extensively, both one-on-one with many of the directly impacted businesses, and there have been a number of informal engagement sessions as well. So while starting with a particular concept design, we've worked through and made a number of refinements to that and to address particularly concerns around, I suppose, parking and access, loading zones. And I thought, felt that we had reached, quite reasonable agreement on many of those issues. I'm still aware, officers are aware that there are some concerns about the design and elements of the design that they believe, some of the businesses believe, will result in congestion and problems for traffic movement. Officers respect their view, but we believe that the design as we're providing is consistent with those broader aims and goals. And so I think we're bringing the process to you for endorsement. There have been positive feedback as well from a number of the people we've been engaging with. So really we believe we're at a point where we can confidently tender the works. In fact, we've issued it for tender just because we want to keep the process moving, but there's still opportunities obviously for that process to be interrupted or for us to provide amendments for any particular elements. So the intention is also that we we go out and we communicate where we've got to with the wider community, and that we're open to any particular feedback. So really, yeah, I think officers feel we've reached a point where we've addressed most of the primary concerns, and we have a robust and a consistent design which delivers on the outcomes that councillors are seeking. And we're keen that we continue to move this forward through tendering with a view to constructing this in the second half of the financial year.
Thank you, Robert. There are a number of questions. We'll move into those. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. Robert, I have particular questions around, you talk about in the summary of key design considerations. I suppose my questions in this reflect the report that came through infrastructure on the ARENA project, which highlighted the particular benefit and learning that we'd found in including storytelling, heritage and public art considerations at the earlier stage of development. So I wanted to find out at this stage where you said those considerations have included provision, but there doesn't seem to be any actual delivery. So what are we doing?
Yeah, well, at this stage, I suppose we're concentrating on the hard elements of the infrastructure. So that's the roading and the curb lines and some of the garden areas. So what is still open and we'll engage with going forward is what might be placed within those elements of, gardens and public space which have been created. So there's still an opportunity to engage with that. That's not within the piece of work that's being tendered externally. That would be done with other parties internally. So, and I'm sure that. So we haven't got an active process at the moment, but we can certainly move forward on some of those elements. So sculptures, for instance, are being talked about. Some, engaging with some of the place, active place creation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Specifically, what I'm interested in here is the military heritage theme that we've been talking about for a long time and have not yet delivered anything on, and Cuba Street has been an area of particular interest in that discussion. So what I'm looking for is to see how that is going to come forward here, because so far it hasn't.
Noted, yeah. So we can take that on board. I wasn't aware that there was a particular interest in that area. So,
Madam Chair, there seems to be a problem with knowing that there's a particular interest in this area, so I'm going to look to bring forward a specific recommendation here that this Cuba Street work does specifically include delivery in that line, and we'll test the room with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
If you could, write something up and bring it forward. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. One is, I understand there's been another follow-up meeting with business and just in recent weeks, and one of the issues that's come through is around the queuing bay for the left-hand and right-hand turn into Rangitikei Street. How widely promoted is it from those affected businesses that are wanting that because of the concern around the queuing down the street?
yeah, I mean, there was a engagement tendered by some of the businesses. I mean, it was the first time in some ways that officers had heard the specifics around them challenging that particular design element. I mean, the design of that exit into Rangitikei is specifically been designed around limiting one lane in each direction. And that's really because it slows vehicles entering, exiting Cuba Street, creates a level transition for pedestrians, it shortens the distance that pedestrians travel. So it's inherently central to the sort of concepts of the design. So we heard those concerns, but we also, I mean, officers who attended, and it was facilitated by Councillor Harpiter and the Mayor, also heard a dissatisfaction with some of the wider changes across the central city. So it wasn't clear that it was uniquely this project, but it was more a statement, and there were a number of opinions around, you know, you can't drive through the CBD anymore, it's too slow, and, you know, you get held up. So I think, you know, fundamentally officers believe that what this project is doing is another incremental step in the process of resetting, you know, the central area as a destination or as a place focused rather than a movement and corridor-focused experience. So yes, there will be impacts on traffic movement through Cuba Street, but that's the product of reducing the link, you know, the area allocated to traffic. So there was some concerns around right-left movements in and out of Briscoes, for instance. I mean, we can try to do something to address that, but, you know, that will require us to engage with the business there about, you know, alternative traffic routing. And so we heard those concerns, and I think we don't believe that we can accommodate that without significantly impacting on the core objectives of this project. So to the extent that we can accommodate some of their other concerns around parking and loading zones, and, you know, we have attempted to do that. So, but yeah, we did not feel that it was obligatory on us to, you know, revisit the entire scope of design based around that feedback.
Thank you. And just finally, on the attachment 2, you've got the bus stop, which comes out into the road corridor from what I can see, and whether or not there'd been any concerns expressed around that, and whether another loading zone type of indentment was a preferred solution around.
No, it was certainly raised, and we have considered it, but our belief again is that the number of bus movements and the frequency with which that would occur would be very small, so that we're really trying to retain the overall landscape and design of the road, you know, and not, you know, unnecessarily incur cost for something that is a relatively transitory sort of effect. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Robert. A couple questions. One is just as you spoke to briefly, we're being asked to endorse something that is currently out for tender, and just wondering if this is an overall new way of approaching things, or if this is a bit of a one-off.
Well, I think, you know, there's been a long period of gestation for this project, and I suppose what we felt was that we'd reached, although the two options in front of you are different, there are not dramatic differences. So we are still, the process of going out to tender is merely to try and test the market, to see whether there is capability and interest. There is still plenty of opportunity to, as it were, make some minor tweaks here and there. I mean, there's line marking, there's various things that could be changed. So we really wanted to expedite the work. Ordinarily, yes, we would want to come to you and then not necessarily make a decision. But, I mean, we're being, you know, these processes take so long, and if we waited again, we wouldn't have gone out, you know, to tender until next year. And so, look, at the end, we're interested in getting the work done by the end of this financial year. So, but that doesn't really preclude any feedback or any changes being made. The tender process is open till the end of January, and even then, we can make changes through the variation process with the contractor. So,
right, thank you for that. Perspective and update. Just wanted to ask then specifically about the revised option in Cuba Street near Tainui. My understanding of the original is that it had parallel parking proposed in that area, and it appears on the drawing of the revised that it now has angle parking. So I was just wondering the original rationale around parallel parking and what we're potentially giving away by going this direction.
So clarify, that's the parking in Tainui, is it? Not
no,
on
this
Cuba.
is in Cuba.
Do you have any comment? No. We did have right angle parking, but now we have angled. Oh, you mean the
on the north side?
Yeah, right, north side. Yeah, no. Well, purely to actually mitigate the loss of parking. So, I mean, we, you know, with the angled parking, we're obviously achieving significantly additional offset. So we reduced the number of parking loss to 5, I think 5 places overall. Yeah. So yeah, that's the primary.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand the original benefit of when it was proposed as parallel. Was that around safety? Was that around amenity? Was that?
Yeah, in general, parallel parking is a much safer, you know, interaction with the street environment. Angle parking obviously forces the vehicle to back out into the active traffic. So having it on both sides means we've potentially got vehicles backing out against one another. So I think that was felt. But it was a compromise we felt we were prepared to make in the interests of mitigating the loss of parking within the street. So, yeah.
And can the actual hard surface implementation of this be done in a way that over time that could be migrated to parallel parking, or is it or is this quite committing in terms of getting into an angle parking?
Well, the indent is hard, but obviously the line painting is, you know, will wear out over time. So you could repaint the area and you could repurpose it. Most of the elements could be adjusted, you know, with some modest investment over time if we felt they, you know, they could work more effectively.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Robert. I had a couple of questions. The first one was about the angle parking as opposed to the 90-degree parking. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the other side, you know, a bit further up Cuba Street, we've got 90-degree parks, haven't we?
We have.
So, I mean, do you have a comment about sort of consistency in the street, or it just seems a little bit odd to me that we've got 90-degree parks on the bit from, you know, George Street up, and then we're going back to angle parks further down?
Yes, well, the optimum position from officers was that the right angle parking delivers the best, slowest environment. It means that, but it was also promoted, if you recall, on Square East, and there was considerable resistance around its performance. Obviously, people saw how it was working in Cuba, and so there was quite a lot of pressure on us to modify that approach. So, yeah.
So here the angle parking is in response to the community request, is it?
Yeah, maybe Chris Lai would like to comment.
Since those 90 degrees bays have gone in, we have had a number of safety concerns raised with them, with people trying to get in and out of them. The problem with 90 degree bays is you need to reverse out about 2.5 metres before you can actually see oncoming traffic. When you're on an angle, it's slightly better, but there is still a safety risk. With the use of safety reversing cameras, it does make it a bit easier, but not every car has them. It is a bit of a trade-off. If you're going to go from 90, you get a bit more car parks, but you might need to have a wider road, or you need to have that safety benefit trade-off.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. The other question's around the parking for Kui cleaners. So, as you'll recall, we had the business owner come in and make a deputation around that earlier this year. So has that been resolved to the satisfaction of the business?
We understand so. He retains, as you see on the plan, there is a vehicle crossing, which is, actually butts up against a roller door, which is actually on his business. And there is a loading area which also is available, however, not exclusively for the proprietor. But he seems reasonably happy with that arrangement at the last conversation we had. So, yeah,
So he's happy, so if we approve this, he's not going to come in and
that's no guarantee.
Again?
There's no guarantee. In some ways, the interactions with the businesses, we seem to feel we've reached an agreement, and then sometime later they bring up different issues. So, it's not always. But we believe that his concerns have been mitigated here. So.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my question's back down to Cuba and Rangitiki. I actually use that intersection quite a lot. And particularly in peak hour, you'll get traffic right back to Briscoe's, even blocking the Briscoe's entrance. And that's with 2 lanes going through now. I can see this making it go back to the other Briscoe's entrance if you carry on this way. A lot of cars turn left and right from that intersection, and you're only going to have one way, so I can see that traffic going to be blocked up there quite fast. Now, do you think that's the best way? Is there another way around that?
Well, as part of the development, we will rephase the lights, so essentially you will get a dedicated phase out of Cuba Street into Rangitiki. But yeah, there's no question that the capacity of Cuba Street in terms of each cycle of lights will be possibly less than there is now. But then I go back to the original intent of this as part of the wider piece of work, which is to actually persuade shoppers and people coming into the CBD that they can, park and walk, and they don't necessarily have to drive immediately to their destination. There is no shortage of options for parking within 100 metres of that location. And we're also trying to discourage a lot of people from using Cuba Street as a through route. So I think some of that experience. So, this is not new for any community that's working on, modifying their central business districts and changing the way that they, reprioritise space. So, but yeah, we can't, we would anticipate that there will be a little bit of congestion at certain times. But that's likely to be still relatively limited. It's going to be around the busy shopping times, the busy shopping days. Nobody can cater for Black Fridays. Everybody wants to go everywhere on a Black Friday. But, I think we believe that, for most of the time, as is the case with, Cuba Street Stage 1, there's very acceptable outcomes for traffic that's trying to is where its destination is in that area, you know, and then.
Yeah, with Briscoe's been quite a busy shop, and it does get packed, and even their own car parks gets filled. You said it's going to be dedicated, from Cuba Street into Rangitikei. Well, there is already. There is already. There's the left turn. Now, with this, you're not going to have that left turn because if someone's going to turn right, it's going to block it up. So anyone turning left is going to get piled up behind them. So one car turning right is going to block up the whole system when the left arrow goes because they can't go. And it's going to be quite a traffic jam.
Dedicated both directions.
It probably depends on what happens at squares.
Okay. Yeah, some of these things are dependent a little bit what else we do around the square. So one of the pieces of work that the officers will be looking at is how we can actually rebalance all of the traffic signals so we get a coherent interaction between all of them. So that might, that should help some of that as well.
But that left turn light, when it comes up, if there's a car turning right there,
we will have lost
it's going
that
to block it all
filter.
up. Isn't it? So you're going to have at times where I can see quite a large traffic jam there.
Councillor Finney, is there an additional question?
I'm still not satisfied with the answer about how they're going to get around that problem happening.
I think the officer has answered it by indicating that they're going to be looking at the phasing with the changes.
Okay.
Did you have any further questions, Councillor?
No, fine, that's fine.
Thank you, Robert and Chris. There's no further questions. Councillor Hapara.
I'd like to put a procedural motion up to recommend that we lie it on the table, and my reasons are that I don't feel we have communicated effectively with the affected businesses that are on Cuba Street. Having met with them last week, we had 14 businesses that were very angry with our consultation, and I feel like we're going to have another College Street on our hands if we don't listen to these businesses. I had officers with us at that meeting and they were very angry, and it's not just one business who does jump up and down, it's actually more than one who are very angry with us. So I do think we need to go out for another round of consultation before we actually approve this document, so that's why I think it needs to be laid on the table. I hope you support me with this.
Thank you, Councillor, and I understand the Mayor is seconding that procedural motion. We'll just get that typed up and then we will vote.
Madam Chair, could I ask a question before we vote?
Not on the procedural motion, on process as a whole.
I guess it's a process thing, because if this is currently out for tender and we lay it on the table, what happens at that point?
So with a procedural motion, we just put the motion, and the motion is that it lie on the table. So
what happens to the tendering is my question.
Oh, sorry, just one moment.
No, it doesn't come back to council. It doesn't come back to council.
That's what I'm trying to find out. But
So the recommendation that has been is considered to be put on the table is for the preferred option, and so essentially the work is out for tender at the moment, but if a tender was accepted, which won't come back through the council chamber, that'll be under the Chief Executive's delegation, there won't be an option to delegate to them until this is signed off by council. Because this is the work that council are endorsing.
it's not very clear to me what the consequences of voting on this procedural item.
I'll just ask you to refrain from speaking any further, because at this stage there is not an option to go into questions and comments on this. We're going to be voting now on the procedural motion. So
Okay, well, I will
you
vote
can choose how
accordingly
you
then,
vote.
thank you.
And I'll invite you to vote now. Can you just double check you've voted, please? That has carried 8 in favour and 7 against.
Can we see the voting, please?
There were 2 additional motions that came forward with the item that have just been voted on that will need to be referred to, be considered in the new year when we return to that item. Moving on now to item 13, page 155, the District Plan Change C, Keke Whenua Residential Area Operative Report. And we've got Michael coming to speak to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is really, I guess, a procedural matter. We notified a plan change in, I think it might have been 2018, to rezone some land out at Te Wanaka Road from race training zone to residential. There was a decision made by council late last year, and then it was appealed. The appeal was resolved through mediation through the Environment Court, and it's got legal effect, and this is really the last stage of the RMA process for the rezoning. So it's really a procedural matter to bring the plan change to a close.
Thank you, Michael. There is a question from Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Michael, for the report. I do have some questions here, and I guess they relate to my reading of the Commissioner's findings, which on my reading were very clear about an intent that we should integrate very carefully our land use planning and our transport planning, and had very specific guidance from the Commissioners around a policy that would see a full upgrade of the intersection of Te Wanaka Road and a change to speed limit before commencing the subdivision. Now, obviously, that went to appeal, and on the other side of the mediation, the policy's gone, and we now have a rule that says an expert needs to be satisfied that it's safe, which is quite a different statement. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is what the practical implications are of that change that has arisen through the mediation process.
I think the decision that came through through the mediation aligns with the officer advice that was given as part of the plan change process, and in terms of, I guess, how it would work practically, when it comes to subdivision, there would be a requirement for a transport engineer to provide an assessment to justify that the development can proceed in a safe manner, and they will need to determine whether that can be achieved, and that will need to be backed up by evidence, and that can be scrutinised through the consenting process. It's quite typical of how subdivision development is assessed, not unusual in any manner, and I think one of the reasons why the decision was appealed was because it was actually technically not legal, having an external factor involved in making a decision. So there was a requirement for an upgrade to be made that was outside of council's control, so technically ultra vires. So there needed to be a change in approach to make it legal, which is one of the reasons why the Environment Court mediation was resolved in the manner that it was. But I would like to reiterate that it's not an unusual approach to take, and in terms of integration between land use planning and transport planning, there is some integration between that and the fact that we have got funding to support NZTA in ensuring that an upgrade can proceed, and we are in active conversations with the NZTA to make sure that that can happen when development opportunities arise. And in terms of the speed environment change, that will need to be led by NZTA because it is the estate highway, but we are working collaboratively with them on that also. So it may mean that when development does proceed and a subdivision application is presented to the council, if a traffic expert is able to prepare a transport assessment that can prove that either a staged development or a full development can happen in a safe and efficient manner, that would need to be approved by NZTA as well, and they would need to be satisfied with that proposal also for it to be granted. If it's not deemed to be safe, then a subdivision would not be able to be granted.
Thank you. I guess in my mind I feel that this is a bit like a deja vu of Kelvin Grove, State Highway 3, Napier Road, Roberts Line, etc. So what comfort could we have as a council that we're not just being duped into recreating those sort of road safety issues a second time?
I guess one of the issues that...
If I can just comment, one of the differences is there's a program in the council asset management plan program for an intersection upgrade at this intersection. There hasn't been for Roberts Line. And I mean, I guess part of the challenge there is it's an NZTA highway at the moment, but there is continual talks about that portion of Pioneer Highway becoming a local road, and we're also actively engaging with NZTA about reducing the speed limit on that part of the road, which they've started that process. So, I mean, I take your point. We want to, as much as possible, avoid a scenario where, 20 years later we're still waiting for an intersection upgrade at Roberts Line and Napier Road. I think the thing the council has done different here is it said if we want to support residential development in this location, then on behalf of our community we will fund an intersection upgrade and collect that back via development contributions, all the while also trying to put pressure on NZTA to co-fund that roundabout.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Final question that I have is just around potential consequences. I know it's been presented to us as a procedural matter. I guess I see it as a bit more than that. I'm just wondering if what the consequences would be if council at this point decided not to support the recommendations.
So procedurally, the decision's already been made. Very much as a procedural matter now. It's, I guess, a bit of a rubber stamping exercise. To be honest, there isn't an option to decline or, to not, proceed.
I think that the challenge with making a decision other than the recommendations in front of you this afternoon is that the group of councillors sitting around the table did not hear the evidence. So that decision making power has been delegated to the commissioners. so it's coming back for final approval. The only thing you could do is, if you didn't want to support it at this time, is to obviously not approve the recommendation in front of you and formally withdraw the plan change. So it would be withdrawn and there would be no rezoning.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Michael. There's no further questions. So we've got the recommendations, 4 recommendations in our order paper, 3 on the screen currently, and that is moved by Councillor Hapara and seconded by Councillor Dennison. Thank you. Is there any comment? Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and it has been insightful for me and probably a revision on some of my RMA course training around process here and where the decision points sit in this, but do want to speak to register my discomfort with where we're at, and that discomfort is directly linked to the multi-decade challenge that we have had around resolving the traffic safety issues along Napier Road, Kelvin Grove, and the intransigence of the transport agency there, while more and more deaths have piled up in that stretch of road, and not wanting us to see commencing a ultimately large development to the west of the city that also, I guess, that commences without an assurance that we can do much, much better by our community than what's happened so far in Kelvin Grove. And I do hear and acknowledge and appreciate what our officers have said and done by way of trying to I guess, make the best of a challenging situation where ultimately all the cards sit with the transport agency until they decide to actually respond to the call from the community in this case. And given that so far all we have is a conversation with them, from what I can understand from the response to questions, rather than certainty about road safety coming into this consideration as this development might proceed, it may simply end up being a vote of protest, but it will be a vote against this because I'm uncomfortable with development proceeding without assurance that the transport needs, including the road safety needs of our community, are being addressed in parallel rather than decades behind.
Councillor Hapara, my apologies for not inviting you to speak first.
That's okay. Very conscious of what Councillor Barrett has said, and very mindful that we do want that roundabout in, exactly because we didn't get that at Kelvin Grove first, but very conscious of this area of the city and wanting to support this area for growth, and really keen to see this growth happen. So I just want to support that, and wanting to see that this happens as soon as we can, so wanting to support this recommendation and these recommendations going forward. So well done to everyone involved in this, and looking forward to it getting through. Thank you.
Thank you. With no further comments, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 11 in favour and 1 against. Moving on to item 14, the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust Annual Report and Audited Annual Accounts 2020, page 159. We will take that as read. Are there any questions? We'll just give the officer a moment to arrive. Thank you, Hannah. There are a couple of questions. Councillor Barrett.
Happy to move the officer's recommendation. So I would have said, but...
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Bowen, did you have a question? Right, so that is moved by Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Bowen. Is there anyone wishing to make a comment? Councillor Barrett, did you want to speak? No? Great, well, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 13 in favour with 1 abstention. Moving on to item 16, committee chair appointments for the remainder of 2019-2022 term. Page 181. I will move the recommendations on the screen, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Thank you. Are there any questions on this item? I was just moving it first in case there were any questions for the officer before she took a walk. Councillor Johnson, is this a question for staff or for the Mayor?
I'm not really sure. You can determine who it should be addressed to. So it's a question about process.
Yes.
So under 3.1 it says, a call for expressions of interest resulted in 4 members expressing interest, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't say anything in the report about either the Mayor or Deputy Mayor approaching people to ask if they're interested. Can you confirm whether that happened or not?
The 3.1, sorry. Oh, so in terms of the process, so I mean, I certainly had a conversation with a number of elected members who had signalled at various stages in the last few months around an interest in different roles, so I can speak for myself. Mr. Mayor, did you want to make a comment about that, 3.1?
Kia ora, everybody. Yes, look, the call went out to everybody. All elected members were asked, so and people responded accordingly. Thank you.
So I think that in 3.1 it doesn't accurately reflect what actually happened, which was a call went out for expressions of interest, and after that elected members were approached to ask specifically if they're interested in specific roles. So the process hasn't, to my understanding, been followed as per 3.1.
Sorry, did you have another question?
Well, the question is, were elected members who had not expressed an interest in the role approached to see if they would be interested?
The Mayor's answered via chat to say no. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, did you want to respond to that question?
Oh, no, just to say no.
Okay.
Everybody that expressed an interest did that either to me personally or online or via the governance manager. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also a question about the process. So reading that a call for expressions of interest resulted in people putting their hands up, what, if anything, happened between that expression of interest and the Mayor submitting this report today?
So in terms of the process, the governance manager sent us a list and then the Mayor and I had a conversation. Then following the conversation with us, we had a conversation with the chairs of the 2 committees and basically gauged their interest or had asked for their perspective, and then the Mayor made the decision.
So were the people who expressed an interest advised of this at any point or advised of that process?
I'm unsure. No.
Thank you.
Great. There are no further questions. Is anybody wishing to make a comment? I've already moved the recommendation. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I do want to make a comment, which is that whilst there has been a small improvement in process around this, we still are not dealing with a transparent process of inviting expressions of interest. So to my certain knowledge, an elected member was approached and asked whether they had interest in a role to which they had not themselves expressed interest until they were asked. And I don't feel that that's a fair and transparent process. It's not what we agreed, and it's certainly not what's reflected in the document, and so I'd like to register that that I don't think is a fair and transparent way of going about things.
Thank you. No further comments, so I'll invite you to vote. Oh, my apologies. Mr. Mayor, you had a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, look, I refute the councillor's comments. I don't go along with innuendos and rumours. Everybody that wanted to have an opportunity had an opportunity. And people have, sometimes people don't go through the correct door. And look, I can hold my head up high and say integritally that the process was followed. And I'm over some petty politics. Thank you. If you don't like it, please vote against it.
I'll invite you to vote. Great, that has carried 9 in favour, 1 against and 4 abstentions. Moving now on to the council work schedule, item 17 on page 187. The Chief Executive's got nothing further to add. I'll move that the Council resolve to receive its work schedule dated December 2020, seconded by Councillor Hapara. Thank you. Are there any questions? Great, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 100%. Moving on to item 18, page 189, the presentation of the Rangitane o Manawatu Committee recommendations from the 25th of November.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been asked to move the recommendations of the Rangitane o Manawatu Committee meeting of the 25th of November, which essentially was to rotate the chairs each year between our Mayor and Mr Te Aweawe. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dennison. I'll second that recommendation. Is there any comment? I'll invite you to vote. Great, that has carried 100%. Moving on to item 20, page 193. Item 19, page 191, and I'll invite Councillor Dennison to present those recommendations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, stand to move recommendations from the Infrastructure Committee meeting of the 2nd of December. Two items that generated quite wide public interest, particularly the one around the Manawatu River shared pathway, which the recommendations there before us. It come forward with some other options. One was to do nothing, which was the nothing will happen option, essentially, if we just let the ongoing negotiations take place. The second one was taking a highway side pathway option, which no one's ever asked for, and this one gives the ability of officers now to take a consideration of some legal avenues, which is incorporated in the recommendation. So just speaking for that, it's a big issue for the city. The other one, of course, was the Summerhill cycle upgrade options, and again, some interest. This is taking the more moderate option with incorporating some indents for parking in the bus bay. So for that, thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Jennison. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hapara. Is everybody happy to take those recommendations together? Okay, we will separate 4820. And we'll vote on 4820 first. Is there any comment? Great, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 14 in favour with 1 against. We'll now vote on 4920. Is there any comment on that? Great, I'll invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. Moving on to item 20, page 193. And I will move that the recommendations from the Part 1 Public Planning and Strategy Committee from the 9th of December be adopted. Seconded by Councillor Hancock. Is there any comment? Great, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 100%. Moving on to item 21, page 195, and I'll invite Councillor Beattie to present the recommendations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move that the presentation of the Part 1 Public Finance and Audit Committee recommendations from the 16th of December be approved.
Seconded by Councillor Hapara. Is there any comment? I'll invite you to vote. Great, that has carried 14 in favour with 1 abstention. Now, just before we move into our late item, I would suggest that item 24, the notice of motion for Memorial Park, be moved into Part 1. So that will be considered along with the Memorial Park late item. So moving on to item 24, Councillor Johnson, we have a notice of motion in your name. How would you like to proceed?
Well, I had indicated that I was happy to withdraw it, given that the funding was now fully available, but governance advised that the better process was to bring it to this meeting and then withdraw it, so I'm happy to withdraw it since it's no longer required.
Thank you.
Does that meet the process requirement?
Procedural motion, we will need to lift it off the table before we can get rid of it.
Just organising process, so we will lift it off the table, but when we withdraw it, we still need a resolution to withdraw it because it's been moved and seconded, and so it is a live motion, so our standing orders are very rigorous.
I'll be advised by you, Madam Chair. I'm sure you're an expert on the standing orders.
So I'll move that we lift the item off the table, seconded by Councillor Johnson. I'll invite you to vote on that. So you can now vote on that. Right, that has carried 100%. Now, Councillor Johnson, you'd like to move to withdraw your notice of motion?
Yes.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Hancock. And I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 100%. Sorry, my apologies.
Can it be capitalised? Because I don't want a notice of motion of mine without the correct capitals. Thank you.
I'll invite you to vote on the recommendation on the screen. The capital letters will be added by the time the minutes come out. Right, that has carried 100%. So we'll now look to our late item, and I'll invite Kathy Deaver-Todd to speak to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll take the item as read, but there's just, I guess, one comment that I'd just like to make at this stage. It's been quite a journey to get to the point we're at today, where we're saying that we're working towards reopening the park in early January. And we've already started working with contractors, with our building people, to get it open as quickly as we can. However, it's not an ideal situation, and there are going to have to be substantial health and safety issues to manage. And part of that will be the community working with us. It'll be in and around not only putting a plan in place, but managing the community expectations around that. So access to the site will not be as it has been previously. It won't be quite as easy to access. We are recommending that car parks stay closed. And what we're trying to balance here is the ongoing construction to enable then the playground to open and the splash pad to open. And so we're trying to balance having community access to water with continuing to be able to get those other community facilities open at the same time. And it will be a balancing act. As outlined in the report, if we are unable to balance those health and safety concerns, we will be in a situation where we may have to temporarily restrict access to the pool in order to allow construction works to occur safely. Or in the worst case scenario, if we can't work with our community, we may have to close the pool for health and safety reasons and proceed on. We do, however, believe that we have got a plan in place and that we have carefully weighed up the health and safety concerns, and that we can manage them if we all work together and the plan as outlined works. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kathy. There's a question from Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kathy, and we really do appreciate all your work on this. I think my question is in the area that you're talking about, is how did we move from it's not practical to open the pool and we're not doing it to, oh, but yeah, we can. How was it not practical and now it is?
So we're not completing all of the works that we would have completed on the pool prior to opening it. So we are putting in place the fencing. We are having to put some temporary fencing up, which is not ideal. But things such as removing tiles and regrouting the pool will not happen now until we close for the winter season. We will only get that pool to a safe condition and not undertake all the work that we had anticipated. Also, we said it wasn't practical previously because we couldn't see a way that it was going to be practical to have good accessibility to that pool. And we had talked at an earlier conversation with councillors about the fact that the hillside, to come down that hillside, it is quite steep and it is quite difficult. So we'll probably be encouraging people to come in from the Fitzroy entrance and work through. But we've concluded now that we can't really have access for people and vehicles down in that car park. So take that out of the equation. And that's, I guess, where we really ended up. So this is really a not ideal compromise situation. The fencing around the pool means the area around the pool will be smaller. There will be less families that will be able to be in that area at the same time. We hadn't anticipated that we might have to put staffing on, and we will do that to manage this. So this is we were saying previously it wasn't practical to have a fully functioning, operated, all ready to go pool. This is definitely a compromise situation.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. Just questions around 3.6 and 3.7, the option of free swimming at Freiburg Pool. And there's a couple of options discussed there. So there's the option for free child entry session and the option for free swimming for all swimmers. And then in 3.7, there's the set price. So I'm not very clear whether we're just leaving that open and the CE can just decide what option is appropriate at the time, or whether we need to make a decision on that today. Are you just proposing that those things be kept sort of in our back pocket for if the pool isn't available, and that a decision be made at the time on which is the most appropriate? Or would you like direction today?
No, I think you've summed it up really well. We would hope that we can keep the Memorial Park pool open. However, if we suddenly had to close it, we wouldn't be in a situation until February to come back to council for a decision. Right. So what we're asking is for you to delegate to the Chief Executive. We have a budget for operating the pool at Memorial Park. It would be our intention to get the best balance between community access and the available budget that we have, so that there would be no financial implications for council. If that went on for a period of time, you may wish at a later meeting to reconsider that, but that would give us enough to be able to continue with swimming. If it wasn't at Memorial Park, then convert straight over to Freiburg.
And so if that had to be invoked, that clause about the free swimming at Freiburg, would there then be some communications around that? Or is there the possibility that people would turn up at Memorial Park and then find the pool was closed and not necessarily know that there was another option?
So with this whole proposal for Memorial Park, we have to have really good publicity. That means down at the pool, on our social media, on our council website. And that's in around not only what's happening at Memorial Park, but what other options are available for swimming, such as the Esplanade and the Under 5 programs that you already fund. Our intention would be to use those channels to announce if we had to close Memorial Park suddenly, but in anticipation of something like, say, a large concrete pool, where we would know that a couple of days in advance, we would provide that signage at Memorial Park as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Councillor Hapara.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. So what would be the numbers that we could potentially get into Memorial Park, swimming numbers?
That's a bit hard to advise, because it's not, the pool is no smaller, it's the area around the pool, so it really depends on the makeup of people that are visiting on the day. That's why we're recommending during busy periods to have a supervisor at the site. So if you have a lot of children in the pool but not many supervising adults, we're probably going to be fine. But if we have it the other way around, a lot of large family groups and only a few of the children are swimming, that's when we're going to have difficulties.
So are you going to be turning people away?
Potentially we could turn people away. Having not an in-depth knowledge of how the pool is used relative to the rest of the site when it's restricted, it's a bit hard to anticipate that. But we really, through our publicity, have to advise people that it is a smaller area, that it isn't what it has been, and that the water's available. But that's why I'm saying we need somebody on site to manage that. In an ideal situation, perhaps through our publicity, we could say, hey, these are our quieter times of the day, come in during the quieter time and maybe spread that demand out. Maybe another option rather than turning people away.
Thanks, Kathy.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a point of clarity, just around if we were to operationalise the Freiburg option as an alternative, how would elected members actually know that we've actually done that, and what the cost implications subsequently have been? You understand what I'm saying? Is that, at the moment, that's just an option, but we may not necessarily have to use that, so thank you.
We would notify you through a Chief Executive's update.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Kathy. I have a long question. I mean, at the moment, we are planning to, obviously this swimming pool will be free for the community, and people going to Freiburg are paying something. If something happens, like you have described in the report, and we have to offer these people Freiburg swimming pool, what is the mechanism to differentiate between the people, okay, these were the people who are considered to be enjoying the free facility, and these are the people who are initially paying, and they have to pay, or it will be free for everyone, the Freiburg?
So our recommendation would be that council moves with the everybody who comes in during the session time doesn't pay option. To make it quite clear, the session times are at times of the day where our regular users don't generally use the pool. Deliberately, we've chosen that to make sure that we don't impact on other users. So it's a time of the day that the pool has low activity anyway, and we would anticipate that up to 250 residents, whoever turned up at the door during that time, would be able to enter the pool for free.
Oh, great. Thank you. That's clear. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kathy. There's no further questions. So, councillors, we've got the recommendations on the screen and in our order papers. I'm happy to move those, seconded by Councillor Johnson. And we'll open up for comment. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I am very pleased to see these recommendations coming through to Council, and I'm pleased that staff and the CE have listened to feedback from the community as well as from elected members around the need for urgency about providing access to the swimming pool, but also in being a little inventive around the option of free swimming at Freiburg if our Memorial Park pool is unavailable. Because honestly, I felt very uncomfortable that we had removed effectively a community facility over the summer, and one that was free at that for children and families without providing any alternative. So this gives me much more security in feeling that if we do have to have the pool closed, that there is another option available. And incidentally, I note that it's not really all that expensive. And so, whilst I'm not going to suggest anything right now, I think we could keep in mind that this is something that we might like to consider as an option in school holidays going forward, because the price for free child entry at the 6 3-hour sessions a week during the month of January isn't really an excessive amount of money. So I'll leave you with that thought, but I won't ask for your support on it right now.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, absolutely delighted to see some rapid movement on this, and thanks very much to the officers for responding so positively to requests to do something in this space, because not only elected members making our thoughts felt on this, but also the community have been incredibly vocal. And I think it speaks to the way that people just rely on things being there, and they don't really vocalise the value of those until there's a potential for it not to be. And we don't often hear that in our park space, but these spaces are incredibly valuable in our community, and hold, and what came through to me in the social media comments, hold a remarkable amount of social history and community commitment. And people talked about how they use that space. And yep, it's important as swimming, and swimming we know is a real health and safety risk and opportunity in our community. But it's so much more than swimming. It's a focal point for families and communities to gather. And we'd taken that away, and they told us in no uncertain terms what that meant to them. So I'm absolutely delighted that in some small and complicated way, we can reopen it to them, and hope that we can work with our community to make that a safe experience for the summer period. So thank you very much.
Thank you. There's no further questions, so I'll invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. We now move to the exclusion of the public, and this is in regards to items 23 and 25, with 24 obviously already being addressed and brought forward. So I'll move that we move into public excluded, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Thank you. And I'll invite you to vote. Great, that has carried 100%. Just take a couple of moments to get ourselves organised for part 2.